everyone, welcome back to my channel and to my read along of the Iliad. This is now part 3 of this read along, so if you haven't seen part 1 and part 2 yet, I will make sure to put up links to those, to link to them in the description so that you can catch up to where I am so far. And I also made a quick video that introduces this read along and talks about why I want to do it. And basically it's just to talk about how even stories this old can still feel relatable and approachable and universal and human if we really pay attention to what's happening with the characters. Without repeating that introduction, we are ready to jump into book 4 of the Iliad, but after the last video I was thinking it would probably be better, rather than diving into each chapter individually, to just talk about some general themes from bigger sections of the Iliad that I find interesting and that I think you guys are going to find interesting too. So this video I'm planning to talk about some themes, and especially to talk about the main characters from books 4 to 14 of the Iliad, and then my plan is to make one more video wrapping up this read along. So that's kind of the roadmap for where I'm intending to go from here. So books 4 to 14 of the Iliad are quite a ride. Basically what's happening in these chapters is that the Greeks and the Trojans are fighting, but because Achilles is still sitting on the sideline because he's mad, and also because Zeus is favoring the Trojans at this point. The Trojans are basically running roughshod over the Greeks, and especially Hector is just having a heyday with them, and so the Greeks are really in trouble, especially by the end of this section. There are also just some really kind of cool things from this section, like especially my favorite part is Poseidon's undersea palace and just kind of his undersea world with all of these sea creatures that serve him. That was definitely an interesting visual that I somehow managed to completely forget from my first read through of this book. I'm not sure how that happened. I do think I noticed it more this time because I was reading Percy Jackson and the Sea of Monsters at the same time, so anything with Poseidon was going to stand out to me more than usual. And then, like in the last section, there are some things that are pretty funny. There's this one character, Sthenelos, which also is like my favorite name in this entire book. Like I thought Zeth from Stormlight Archive was a little bit hard to say, but that's nothing to Sthenelos. That's just a really fun name. And this poor guy Sthenelos, just at one point Athena comes into the battle and lands in a chariot, and she just picks up this guy and just chucks him out of the chariot. She just like grabs him by the collar and just tosses him out because there wasn't room for both of them. And Athena was like, find a different chariot. And he was fine. He didn't evidently get hurt when he got just chucked out of the chariot, but that's what Athena decided to do with him. So there were just some really kind of funny, quirky moments in this as well. The first character that I wanted to dig into is Agamemnon, who is certainly a complicated individual, as I talked about in my first couple of videos about the Iliad. And in these chapters we get to see a lot more of his relationship with his brother Menelaus. And we especially get to see Agamemnon as a big brother and how protective he is. Like anytime Menelaus is potentially going to get sent into danger, Agamemnon is just kind of like, no, he's not available right now. No, he can't do that. We'll find somebody else to do that job. That sounds kind of dangerous. He just is constantly like, no, don't put him in danger. So on the one hand, that makes him more sympathetic to me because he clearly cares about his brother. He's trying to be very protective, but he also has these lines about like, Menelaus is pretty passive and he really looks to me as a leader, and he kind of, needs me to lead him and kind of give him the nudge. And I'm like, in the scenes where we see Menelaus and not Agamemnon, Menelaus kind of is doing fine on his own, and I think if he's kind of passive, it's probably because he has such an overbearing big brother. So I think Agamemnon is going a little bit overboard on protecting Menelaus, but it is something that I find kind of relatable about him and something of a redeeming quality, that he at least is trying to do what's right by his brother. But at the same time, Agamemnon, in my opinion, is kind of at his worst when he's trying to defend Menelaus at any cost whatsoever. Like there's one part where a guy from Troy pleads for pardon. He wants to be spared. He wants his life to be spared. And Agamemnon's like, nope, you threatened my brother. Pleas for mercy aren't going to do anything for me. And he just kills the guy. And it's like, wow, okay. So it's not always a positive thing that Agamemnon is looking out for Menelaus quite so much, but I do think it helps me understand his motivations a little bit better. It's also impossible not to draw a comparison between Agamemnon and Hector because both of them are in this battle for their brothers. Both of their brothers want Helen, and both Agamemnon and Hector are kind of the stronger, more aggressive brothers. And so they have a lot of similarities, but there's also this contrast where Agamemnon is constantly trying to like rein in Menelaus to keep him safe, and Hector is constantly like showing up behind Paris and being like, "What are you doing, man? Get in the fight." So they're kind of also opposites in that sense of how they deal with their brothers and how they handle being the older brothers who are responsible for a lot of the messes that their younger brothers have made. And also in terms of motivation, Agamemnon seems like a way more brutal person than Hector sometimes, but Agamemnon also just lost his daughter and his wife in various ways, and Hector is fighting for his wife and daughter. So I think that's a really clear distinction between them that kind of causes a lot of the differences that we see between them too. I was also kind of surprised to see Agamemnon have some really human moments where like the Trojans charge and he's legitimately terrified. I didn't expect a book like this to portray any of the big powerful heroes as ever being scared, but he's like absolutely terrified, and he's so stressed that he can't sleep, which I'm like, wow, even 3,000 years ago people who were stressed couldn't sleep. Like some things never change. That's still very relatable. And after Agamemnon gets wounded, he has this moment of, maybe we should just go home. Like, we are gonna get killed out here. We really need to just go home and cut our losses. And I appreciated that he had that moment of kind of introspection, I guess, and just caring about his people and not wanting them all to get slaughtered, and thinking, how can I actually be a responsible king here? So at least that's his line of thought for like 5 seconds before Odysseus talks him out of it, and he's like, "What are you talking about? We have to win glory here." And then Agamemnon's like, "You're right. What was I thinking?" I was like, well, I think you were thinking some pretty reasonable things actually that probably deserved a little bit more attention than they got, but oh well. And then going back to Hector, he's the next character that I wanted to talk about, because one of my favorite parts of this whole book, and one of the saddest parts of the book too, is when he goes back into Troy and talks to his family. He talks to Paris, and he is like really harsh with his brother Paris, which is understandable. I mentioned in my last video that Paris is one of those literary characters that I think is made for us to love to hate, and Hector kind of does too. But then he goes and he has this conversation with his wife, and their baby son is there, and we see how much Hector is fighting this war to protect his city and his family, and that makes him way more sympathetic to me than pretty much anyone else in this story. His wife has had a hard time because she actually comes from a city that the Greeks had sacked and destroyed previously, and her parents and her 7 brothers were wiped out in that war, and now she's in another war, and it's like the same thing is going to happen again to her second family that happened to her first family, and she can see it coming, and there's nothing she can do about it, which is just like, wow, that is really heavy. And then Hector is not very comforting. He's just like, yeah, that's probably going to happen. I'm probably going to die, and you're probably going to be taken away as a slave to live in exile for the rest of your days, which is like, wow, that was bleak. But they're very honest about the reality of what is happening in this war. It's like, that is very tragic. Another contrast that I couldn't help noticing was Hector's family. This is sliding out of the jacket a little bit. Is Hector's family versus the family of the gods, with Zeus and Hera and Athena and several other of the gods, and their family is just so extremely messed up. There is so much family drama between those characters in this book. It's kind of crazy, and just comparing that to the simplicity and goodness of what I see from Hector's family is like, these mortals have a way better family than the gods do, and that's a little bit depressing too. So just in general, if you haven't noticed yet, I'm totally rooting for Troy in this entire book. I'm not sure if you're supposed to be rooting for the Greeks, because like I've talked about before, the narrator seems to be rooting pretty equally for the Greeks and Trojans in some ways, where definitely the Trojans are portrayed as equally sympathetic or more sympathetic to the Greeks. And I'm like, yeah, the Trojans are outnumbered. They're just fighting to defend themselves. They're out there fighting to defend their families and their city, and the Greeks are just attacking because they're mad about what happened with Helen. And yeah, I think Paris is in the wrong in the Helen situation. That's my take on that. But that doesn't mean that the entire rest of the city needs to be leveled to the ground, in my view. So, unfortunately, I know how this story ends, and the book repeatedly spoils itself, so you should know how the story ends. It does not end well for Troy, and so I find that very unfortunate because I think they should have won. But the other thing we get about Hector in this section of the Iliad is his fatal flaw. To reference Percy Jackson again, I did think it was helpful how Sea of Monsters point out that, all the heroes, they have a fatal flaw, and in this section of the book, we get to see Hector's, which is that he does not like to take counsel. His friend Pulidamas points out that Hector feels like he should be able to be good at everything. He should be the top fighter. He should be the top counselor. He should be the top leader. He should just be able to do all these things himself. And I think at this point in the story, he's been wiping out so many Greeks. He's been so victorious for the most part. I think he's starting to get a big head. I think he's starting to feel invincible. This is quite a while after, he tells his wife, I'm probably going to die in this war. I feel like he's forgotten that a little bit by this point, and he starts feeling like, I'm good. We can do this. I don't need to listen to you, Pulidamas. So he's got some pride going on, and pride goes before a fall, and we're about to see some more of that fall materialize as the story goes on. So I think it's pretty interesting that when Patroclus is introduced, he's introduced as basically a counselor to Achilles. He's kind of in this supporting role for Achilles. And I feel like that's what Polydamas is trying to be for Hector and what he could have been if Hector had let him. So this would have been a very interesting story if Hector had kind of let Polydamas be his Patroclus and let him be his counselor and listen to the good advice that he was getting. I think we would have seen a pretty different outcome to this story. And that actually makes for a pretty good transition into talking about Achilles, who we mainly see just in one book of this section where Agamemnon is actually like, okay, I apologize. I need you to fight for us. So sure, I was wrong. Have all these rewards. Have all this stuff. Just come fight for us again. And Achilles is like, no. So, but it's actually pretty interesting, the situation that Achilles is facing at this point, because in his mind, he's like, I can go into this battle, I can win lots of glory, but I'm going to die because that's my fate. Or I can just ditch all these people, not get any glory, and go home, and also not save his people. He doesn't seem like super worried about saving his people at this point, but he will be leaving behind his opportunity to do any good in the battle here if he turns around and goes home. But then he's also like, but if I die, I'm not going to get to enjoy any of the glory or the prizes or anything, so why would I fight? So at this point, he's just planning to go home. He's like, I'm taking my ship with me and I am going home. I'm out of here. And I really find that pretty understandable given the situation that he's in. So I felt like hearing from Achilles' point of view in that section helped me find him a little bit more sympathetic. And I also appreciated that he welcomed in his friends when they came to talk to him. I kind of pictured him just being off sulking and emo and not wanting anybody to talk to him, but he's fine with talking to most people at this point, evidently, just not Agamemnon. He doesn't want to hear anything from him, and he's not going to fight no matter what. But we also get some more backstory about Achilles and how he has spent his entire life from his childhood basically fighting for the Greeks. Like, he's been a soldier for a very long time already at this point, and the wars, I guess, plural, have pretty much stolen his childhood. He's never really known anything else. So I think that makes him make more sense. And he feels like he's given everything to Greece. He's given everything for Agamemnon, and he hasn't been appreciated or recognized for it. And I think that's a pretty relatable feeling, that he's put a lot of value into this army, and they haven't given him much back. They haven't been grateful. Agamemnon evidently didn't even care that Achilles got a prize for the fighting that he did. So I guess I can understand why Achilles is so angry in that case. And I kind of respect the fact that he doesn't come back just for money and prizes. Like, if he had said, oh, okay, if you give me all this stuff, then sure, I'll come back and fight for you. Like, that would have felt pretty shallow. So I guess I'm kind of glad that he didn't just take all the stuff. But as I'm still going to talk about in my next video to wrap this one up, I still have some more problems with Achilles and points of disagreement, shall we say, with Achilles. So we'll get to more of those later. The other main general theme that I saw in this, that I did reference earlier, is just the Greek gods being very disturbing. Zeus's whole plan in all of this is to fulfill the request that Achilles' mom, Thetis, gave him at the beginning. So Zeus is favoring the Trojans this whole time. He's letting Hector kind of dominate the Greeks for most of the time. Um, Partly because he likes Troy and Hector, but he's also setting them up where he wants to put the Greeks into such a position that Achilles has to save them and is going to save them in the most glorious possible way for him. So he's basically fattening Hector and Troy for the slaughter at this point, just so that Achilles can look really epic before the death that he is destined to face. So Zeus doesn't really have a problem letting hundreds and hundreds of mortals die in this war, and he also doesn't really have a problem putting the Trojans through the kind of psychological torture of thinking, hey, Zeus is supporting us, and then something else happens and they're like, oh no, he's not, and then they're like, hey, yes he is, and then they're like, oh no, he's not, and then they're like, oh yeah, he definitely is, and I'm still like, no, he's really not, like temporarily, but long term, no, you guys are toast. And there's usually just lots of behind the scenes family drama motivating all of that. It's also fairly disturbing that the gods are not at all in control of fate. Fate is something that is relatively just outside the gods' control entirely. Like death is going to happen to certain people at certain times, and the gods are like, well, we can't do much about that, or at least if we try, it's not going to go well. And it's pretty disturbing how much they intervene in the battle sometimes too, because they'll like knock weapons away, or at least at one point, they actually paralyze somebody so that he can't escape or fight back. Like it's totally defenseless in the middle of a battle. It's like, wow, that stinks. And then also, like I said, the family of the gods is just so messed up. It's like a really dark version of a 1950s sitcom, basically. That's how it kept feeling to me. So those are some of the main themes that I noticed from books 4 to 14 of the Iliad. If you've read this, let me know what stood out to you from those sections. Let me know if you agree with my takes on this section. And if you haven't read the Iliad, let me know if anything that I said surprised you. Were you surprised to hear any of the things that I mentioned in here? In the next video, I definitely think there's going to be some stuff that's going to surprise you, because I'm planning to talk about robots and slow-mo and all kinds of crazy things that you probably didn't think were in the Iliad unless you've read it. Thanks for journeying with me. Bye.